Hello and welcome to Higher Thinking on Higher Ed. I am Sharlyn Carrington of Content Strong Communications, the fractional communications and marketing leader of choice for universities, colleges, and nonprofits. And today I am so excited to continue diving into the trends and challenges encountered by leaders in higher education. I'm honored to welcome Chris Mueller to the hot seat today. Chris is the Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations at Texas Lutheran University, bringing over 15 years of senior advancement leadership across multiple institutions. A Texas native and seasoned case faculty presenter, Chris has dedicated his career to building meaningful donor and alumni engagement in higher education. Thank you again so much for bringing your expertise to this conversation today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, these are always such fun conversations. I tell everyone I get something big out of each one of these conversations. The first question I always ask is just a little bit of context setting. Let me know a little bit about where you are and what your role looks like in the context of your institution. I think you stepped into advancement leadership at TLU maybe 7 or 8 months ago. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And I know you bring a deep experience from several other institutions. What drew you to this opportunity, and how does your work in advancement kind of align with this university's broader mission right now?
Yeah, so I grew up in Texas, went to college in Texas, eventually moved out of state, met my wife in the Midwest, became a Midwesterner for about 25 years. And last summer, the timing and opportunity presented itself to come back to my native Texas. And I was so happy to be here and come back to a school that I almost attended when I went to undergraduate school. And so it's almost like a full circle situation. But I've worked in faith-based education. I've worked in state universities. I've been in higher ed my whole career. I went to college and never left. And there's something about faith-based schools that I think is just really needed in the world and serves a unique mission and is insulated from a lot of the politics at some level. And you just control your own destiny in a way that I think is very unique versus some other institutions. Coming here was an amazing opportunity. The stars aligned just right in a lot of ways, and just couldn't be more pleased to be here. This group that I lead is the fundraising operation, the alumni relations team, and we also manage our grants operation, which is government grants, foundation grants, those sorts of things. Fairly diverse portfolio. I like to say we're responsible for all the revenue that's not admissions.
Directly from enrollment, right?
Yeah.
I think I love to hear that, just this idea that the joke of you went to college and you never left. I think that gives you probably a really good lens as to what's going on in the broader world here. Something you did say before I ask you the next question is, you feel that your institution and faith-based institutions in general are insulated from the outer world a little bit. Why do you think that is?
I think we just don't have the politics. In Texas, the governor signed a bill just recently giving presidents control of faculty senates. And that's could be good, it could be bad, it could be controversial, could be not, but that's not a dynamic we fit into as a private institution. And we are just there's a little difference there, but it doesn't mean the macro environment doesn't affect us at some level in a lot of ways. And I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit as we go along. But from that standpoint, I think we're unique in private higher ed.
Let's dig into that kind of right now, because my second question is always what's going on in the broader world and how is it impacting you from your perspective at your institution, but specifically in fundraising and alumni relations. What larger sector shifts are having the greatest impact on how your team is approaching donor engagement, institutional growth, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, higher education is in this very dynamic environment. Things are changing in our broader world. They're changing very quickly. And institutions themselves have, we develop these 3-year and 5-year strategic plans, partly because it's what we've been trained to do and partly because our accrediting agencies expect them. But if you were sitting down in 2020, would you have imagined your 5-year plan would look like where you are today? Yeah, and so the dynamics of everything is changing. And just yesterday, I was part of a roundtable discussion. It was talking about strategic planning in the sense that we really can set a path, but every 3 months, once a quarter, we got to be rethinking our goals, our strategies, our tactics related to that. It's not just once a year come back and what'd you do in your job evaluation? I've been at those institutions. What'd you do this year to support the strategic plan? The last time you looked at the strategic plan was a year ago when you did your other evaluation. So Yeah, it's a much different dynamic environment. I think the other thing is how we fit in with larger society and what is expected of higher education these days. This is where we are part of that larger continuum, if you will, because we want to build relationships with corporations, with the larger community, with potential students, with funders, with all these partnerships. And I had a regent at a former institution tell this story one time, which I think really illustrates the point. He said, in higher education, we work with a calendar. We start dealing with, we have, let's say, a strategic plan. So you form a committee and you have a workshop and you put some goals together. And finally, it gets to a board for approval. And it takes about a year to do this. And then you have a 3 or 5 year plan for how you're going to implement it. And he said, you use a calendar. In business, we use a watch. Yeah. And so whether you call me at 9 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, my answer is going to be different depending upon what happens. I don't have a year or 3 years or 5 years to wait for you to get somewhere. And we're finding that now in higher education. And so we've got to adapt to that schedule for people so that we can be the kind of partner that they want us to be.
I think that's a very well taken point. I think that the piece that really speaks to me in that is just generally that everything is moving so quickly. And we see AI disruption, technological disruption, what that means for our everyday jobs, what that means for learning environments, what that means for students' ability to do things, what that means for the value of higher education as a whole. And I think it speaks to that larger shift in general, that things are moving so quickly and our institutions have to be nimble enough and adaptable enough to move along with that, as you rightfully said. If we think about what your current priorities are, what are the most urgent priorities for your team right now at this moment, whether that's related to, I don't know, major gifts or alumni engagement or donor communications? What are the kind of the things you're really focused on right now?
Yeah, I think the thing we talk about the most right now, and as you mentioned, I've only been here about 7 months, but I think it's true across all organizations, is how do we reach our constituents? And there's plenty of research out there and data points that kind of breaks things out generationally, and nothing is absolutely true. It gives you the trends. So if we're trying, as an institution, trying to reach our prospective students, that signals one kind of marketing, right? If we're going to try to reach our young alumni, that's a different channel. If we're going to try to reach our middle-aged alumni, that's a different channel. If we're going to try to reach our reunion class of 50 years ago, that's a different channel. So it's these multi-channel approaches and segments that you're trying to, and that becomes time consuming. It becomes expensive. It becomes a challenge because you're trying to take one message and adapt it to all these different audiences. And with that, when you start thinking about your major donors, which is where I spend a lot of my time, these are people that came to this university in many cases 40, 50 years ago. And they reminisce back on that university that doesn't exist today. It's different. So how do you take what they remember, their fondness about that, and make it relevant to what's happening today in this marketplace and to this university as we've adapted to the changes? We spend a fair amount of time just thinking and talking about this, realizing our resources are limited. So some of it becomes trial and error. And it's a lot more error than trial, I would say, and that we're willing to fail forward in what we're trying, but there's no prescription, there's no recipe, there's no tried and true formula. At this institution, it works, so therefore everybody can use it. If that existed, that person will be the first trillionaire in the world because everybody's going to buy it. But it doesn't work that way. And so how do we adapt things to our own situations and how we've evolved as an institution over time? I think that becomes the crux of what we think about. And then that leads to how are we achieving our goals? What messages are we sending? What are we doing to try to attract people into our mission and to be donors to this institution?
And so I love all of that. I see it as really the bigger picture setting, if you will, as to what it is that you do and what your day-to-day looks like. But how are you doing that? Do you have any good specific examples you could share? How are you? Is it a matter of storytelling? Is it a matter of, just like you mentioned, multi-channels? Like, what are you?
Yeah, I think for a lot of donors, which is where we spend a lot of our time, it's And you could say it for prospective students as well. It
Right.
is someone that you can relate to, that's, oh, I could be that student. Or
Right.
I know I sponsor a scholarship and that's not the student that's specifically receiving my scholarship, but I'm
Right.
supporting a student like that. And a lot of nonprofits in the world have been very successful at this. You know, you think about compassion and world vision, that you get this own person. This is your person that you're sponsoring. And that psychologically fills a lot of buckets for people. And
Right.
so the more we can do that, and so we're trying to lean into storytelling. And we have a new person on our staff that I think is very good at this, but has only been here a few months. So now we're going to go
Right.
through the first cycle
Right.
of a lot of our work and trying to tell more stories about our students, the impact that people are having. And I think that's another part of the storytelling is people aren't just giving to colleges and universities just to give anymore. They want to make a
Right.
difference somewhere.
Right. They want to.
And there's plenty of choices. There's almost 2 million not-for-profits out there. If you have something specific you want to support, you've got a lot of options. So what are your goals and ambitions, and how do we fit into that? And can we develop a partnership, thinking of it as an investor mentality, not just a giver mentality?
Right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. So interestingly, there is that comparison or that connection between a private cause-based, faith-based institution like yours and nonprofits, and drawing that line between how you make that connection with donors. You mentioned that, and this may have been an earlier conversation we had, I can't remember, but you mentioned that many institutions face kind of similar struggles, but still expect these different outcomes. What are the biggest internal or external, for that matter, challenges that TLU is working to overcome right
Yeah, I think some of it's that messaging, our brand, our place in the marketplace, where people view us,
now? Right.
and what's true and what's not true. Some people have seen it, some haven't, but there was the movie The American President that was out with Annette Bening and Michael Douglas years ago. But there's some interesting little leadership tales, and there's this scene, and we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but it's just the messaging that's out there. And the point was, the president wasn't saying anything, and his opponent was saying everything. If you're not saying something, then it must be true, right? But I think we face that in our own world. Things happen, around us, and rumors start and gossip starts, and people develop theories that fit the facts, but they're not true, but in their own way, they think they are. And so those become the obstacles that I think we face. For a marketing department at a university, they are really focused on student recruitment. A vast majority of what they're going to do is on student recruitment. Well, we're not trying to recruit students. We're trying to recruit people, in large cases, that were alumni. So they were students decades ago.
Right.
So it goes back to the point of those messaging and how do we adapt all of that. And so it's really trying to figure out where you can take your limited resources and have the most impact. And that becomes a challenge, I think, in some ways, about how we try to overcome our message, because we just simply don't have, there's not enough room and not enough money in the space in order to address every rumor, every obstacle, every concern. So you got to pick.
I think you made a really interesting point there. Obviously, limited resources is something everyone's talking about across the board, as we don't have enough people. Of course, people are using AI to supplement that in different ways. But I think what you mentioned there, this almost struggle between marketing departments really working towards creating their messaging for students, and then alumni relations departments, for example, working towards creating their messaging and their storytelling for donors. I wonder, if you've ever encountered this where the messaging doesn't align, and sometimes the messaging is in conflict, and does that impact the way you do your job or the way you create your strategies now?
Yeah, I was at an institution once. I won't tell you which one, but the person who was the head of admissions there says, "Sell the sizzle, not the steak," which was an interesting idea. Which, you're at a restaurant, you want the sizzle, that vibe that goes on. But what they discovered is they were recruiting certain students based on this, but then they weren't delivering on the steak, and so the students themselves were choosing to transfer to other institutions because they weren't getting what they thought they were promised. And if we're going to a restaurant, we just choose not to go back or whatever. But for a student, that's a transfer. So I think that speaks a little bit to the what and the why, not just the how of how we have to do planning. And so you think about the what is the students weren't staying. Why weren't they staying? So now how do we create a plan that addresses that? Because if the plan is simply grow enrollment, you're not speaking to the what and the why. And that was for me, that was a very telling kind of moment, seminal thinking, if you will, about you have to deliver. In this day and time for donors, particularly those of higher wealth, they make what we call test gifts. And I've had this experience many times where someone who has uber capacity makes a small gift.
Right.
They could afford a lot more, but they're testing us. Will we use the gift as promised? Will we deliver? Will it have impact? Will it make a difference for our institution?
And how will you demonstrate?
And how do we demonstrate that? And then at that point, we'll make a bigger gift. Yeah. And so you have to follow through. So that one gift is not the end, it's part of a longer relationship. And there's plenty of thought leaders out there that talk about this all the time. And I think for institutions, we face this issue where the urgent is right now. We have this budget challenge, or we need to recruit these students, or we need to change this or we need to do this sort of thing. And for donors, it's a much
longer.
It's a longer
window.
And so we have people who graduated who still very fondly remember a certain president hasn't been here in 50 years. And there's been a whole line of other presidents since then. And this happens to institutions. The average tenure might be 4 or 5 years. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. But over a 50-year period, an alum, a potential donor, might deal with 5 or 6 or 10 different presidents, and that becomes, so you have to somewhere institutionally find this consistency because that relationship lives with the institution. It's not on me. I once interviewed for a job. The president said, "So how many donors can you bring with you to this organization?" I said, "0." And he was dumbfounded. We want to hire somebody that already has a Rolodex of potential donors that they're going to bring with them. Why would the donors that were supporting the organization I was working at support your organization? Why would they do that? And second of all, wouldn't we think that might cross an ethical line somewhere?
Right, exactly.
But they weren't concerned about that. But it was a very interesting interview question. I realized I was not going to be a good fit for that organization. Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about donor relations in general, is that they're completely removing the relationship of the donor to the institution and putting it on the individual who's doing the outreach, which is, I think, backwards.
Right. Yeah. Right. For our top donors, that they might have 20 or 30 relationships at a university, and we have no idea. The person in my role wouldn't even know who all those are. I had a situation at an institution where we were doing a capital project, and we'd been working with this one donor on a potential naming situation. And they were planning to make a $100,000 gift is what we were talking about. They called me in my office one day and said, "We've decided that we're not going to give 100,000. Yeah.
Right.
We've decided we're going to give 500,000 instead." Okay, so now that I pick myself off the floor, get back in my chair, I go, okay, now I haven't, wow, that's very generous. Why? Exactly. They said they called a faculty member who they knew. I didn't know they knew each other. I knew them. I said, "I've been asked to make this gift. I think we're going to do it. Before we did it, I wanted to ask you what you thought about that." Oh, wow, that would be amazing, because this is one of our biggest priorities, and we've needed this for a long time, and we've talked about it a long time, and we're finally at that moment that we really can do it. And if you could support that project at that level, that would be amazing. I know it would really help. Thank you so much. And they went back and said, "You know what? We can do better than $100,000. But that conversation could have gone a completely different way, and I would have never known it. And I would have felt, oh my gosh, I failed. When actually the decision, I was never really
part of the decision.
that decision process. There was other dynamics going on. And I think
Right.
we often in our work, we need to think about not just what an individual does,
Things
but
doing.
how we work together as a team to do things.
It's that strategic alignment across the board.
Who's the vice president of first impressions at an organization? The
Right.
person that answers the phone, the person who cares for the lawn and the facilities at a university. That's your first impression. And that's really important to what we do.
It is, absolutely. Shifting gears just slightly, thinking about all the things that you do on a day to day, I wonder about what metrics you're tracking. How are you tracking or measuring how you're achieving your outcomes and your goals? And what does that look like for you in your world?
Yeah, I think for us, just trying to implement some metrics, because here we haven't used metrics historically. There's been
Okay.
some ideas,
Yeah.
but so we're just starting to implement that. So now our fiscal year started June 1. So now we have some metrics in place. We have a list of 10. How do
Right.
we choose that 10? There are things that are very commonly measured within development alumni relations shops like ours.
Right.
They're benchmarkable to peer institutions. So we have a list of peer institutions. The university just picked a new set of peers. We can
Right.
benchmark ourselves to that group,
Mhm.
right? That data exists. If it's not publicly available, we can call them on the phone and say, hey,
Right.
how'd you do? And so we can benchmark that. And what are things, information we already capture? So it's not something we had to create out of our database or something that we're not already doing. So I think that's, for me, that's the key. And for anybody that's listening, I think that's the for your institution, what are those 8 or 10 things that meet that criteria? So that you can track something in an hour a month, not
Right.
days a month.
Right.
So some of those are very common things, like for gift officers, number of visits per year, or
Right.
dollars we raise for the unrestricted fund or for current operations, or new plan gifts that we receive, or those sorts of things. But we also have some in there on the alumni relations side. We're not tracking event attendance, we're tracking our open rates for emails.
Right.
That's very easy to track. And so many alumni don't come back to campus anymore. They're interacting with us
Completely
digitally.
Yeah.
It's very hard to track like likes on Facebook or reposts on Instagram or all these other sorts of things.
And how does it mean? You don't know if it necessarily means anything just because they like something. You don't know.
And I know there are companies out there that say they can do all this for you, but for us, I don't need the time and expense. An open rate would tell us something.
Exactly.
If our average open rate is 30% and this email was 5 or 6%, something was wrong. And if this one was 80%, and what were our click-through rates? Did they go somewhere? Yeah, and so it just tells us a little bit back to that messaging. Is our messaging resonating with people in a way that they're interacting with the university in a positive way?
I think it's really eye-opening that, and interesting, I guess, that the metrics weren't there before. I wonder what the team, and this is certainly before your time, because I know you've only been there for 8 months or so, but certainly what kinds of things the team was trying, and you don't have to answer this question, I'm just thinking it through. What kinds of things that the team was really looking at before? How were they really measuring success if it was literally just dollar value being brought into the door maybe? But really, I think you spoke so eloquently earlier about building that relationship, and other than a dollar amount coming in, how do you track to know that you're saying the right things to your potential donor and getting that message across the board? And exactly as you said, making sure that message resonates with them in a way that motivates them to action, let's say. Yeah. If you look ahead to the next 6 to 12 months, what does success look like for you and for your team? Are there specific targets you have in mind, or specific goals or transformations you're working towards?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that. I think one is just stability in our office. There's been transition, there's been leadership transitions. It's when I came here, I had to commit to the long haul, and that's what I intend to do, and providing that stability and leadership that we need, but also a commitment to we have an emerging strategic plan. How is that going to change our institution? How is that going to move us forward? Thinking about all the things we've already talked about. But in my view, a fundraising goal is not part of a strategic plan. Fundraising is what makes the strategic plan happen.
Right.
And I've been parts of lots of strategic plans that says we're going to finish this campaign, or we're going to build this building, or we're going to raise this much money. Really, in our work, we should not be setting what those priorities are. That's what a university does. And then we go out and grab donors and interested parties to support, to bring that strategic plan to life, to make it happen.
Right.
And that really is, I think, the work we have to do. So that plan should get to the board this fall. And we'll presumably have about a 3-year plan, which I like, a little shorter, a little bit more dynamic there. But that brings up one of the paradoxes that we have of strategic planning. Boards approve strategic plans. That's one of 4 or 5 things that boards really do, right? Is approve a strategic plan. But then the donors set the strategic direction.
Right.
And so if the board as themselves are not lead donors, and boards tend to over time be giving less and less, and there's reasons for that, but the percentage of giving from the board as part of a total campaign goal is shrinking. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a fact. But then these other donors are coming in and setting strategic directions. And so the trick is you got to align all that. Otherwise, you end up the donors putting you in a different place than what the board thought you were going to be at. So there's a paradox that exists there. And the more that donors are influencing these big transformational gifts, we hear about $40, $50 million, $100 million gifts that happen. Those should change an institution for the better for a long time.
I think that's an really interesting point that you make, that donors really do have a huge role to play in terms of setting direction. I wonder if, actually, but I'm going to leave that question on the table because I think it's a sensitive one. I'm going to leave that one. I'm going to ask you about challenges and about what your one major challenge is. If I were to give you a magic wand right now and you could remove it, snap your fingers, remove that one big barrier out of your way, what would that barrier be? And what would that mean for your team and your ecosystem?
Yeah, I think I started with the private higher ed kind of has it's insulated from certainly the state level politics as an institution. But at the same time, we still have donors and alumni that feel that. And there is this pressure that exists of the institution. In our case, we're faith-based. And so we have a certain denomination that Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is our parent organization. And we have a corporation board of the bishops and lay leaders and so forth. So that influences us. But not everyone feels comfortable with maybe where the church has transitioned to, and so that influences us. So as an ELCA school, this becomes a dynamic that's really challenging at times. And so that division that happens, instead of focusing in on the good stuff, you did this, so therefore I'm not ever supporting you again. That sort of thing. And so you get politics that get involved and the divisions that get involved. And so if I could snap my fingers, it would be, can we focus back on our faith-based mission? What are the kind of graduates that we're putting out that we feel are a benefit to society, that make a difference, that do good things? They're in classrooms, they're nurses in hospitals, they're social workers, they're business leaders, they're all these other sorts of things. And isn't that a benefit? Because I'm not sure any of us are ever going to all agree again on politics and society and all that sort of stuff, but can we have the conversation? And it's this absolute nature of it right now that I think is a challenge. It's a barrier for all of us. And then I think the other thing really is this sense of the urgent. And what have you done for me lately? And I think we all have short memories when it comes to certain things. I've got a situation with my alma mater, one of them that they haven't really been warm and fuzzy to me. They made a promise that they didn't deliver on. I still remember the good times, and I want to I'm one of those, right? I want to reminisce about my time when I was in school, and I still want to support them someday, but I'm not sure that I can support now. Just being and I'm more attuned to it because I'm in field. And so how should you treat your donors? I feel like I should be given a certain, if you say, if you give to this is what's going to happen, that's not what happens, then why should I give you again? But I'll illustrate, and my daughter, when she watches this, will be horrified that I used her as an illustration in this story. But
you have to now, you have to.
Yeah, we had taken a vacation. It was part business trip for me, but it was turned into a 2-week family vacation to China. It was an amazing trip. We're hanging. One day, my daughter comes home after talking to some friends and said, on Christmas break, they went to Disney World and they went to the beach and they went snow skiing. We never do anything fun.
She went to China.
3 months ago, we were in China. Yeah, that doesn't count. So it's like so it's this sense of what have you done for me lately? It's the now, it's the urgent. And that's a hard thing. And our society has become accustomed to that, right? Our marketing speaks to that. Get the whatever that you deserve, and you deserve it today. Yeah. And so that's, I think, for us, a barrier and a challenge that we have to overcome, particularly as we're trying to recruit students, engage young alumni. What have you done for me?
Right. I think it's a very tough, it's a tough dance to dance, because as you mentioned, on the one hand, young alumni are digital natives, just like the students coming in. We expect everyone consumes things automatically. We expect things to happen for us automatically. Right. And we see that in terms of the way we're using AI, the way we're doing anything, quite frankly. Right. The way we watch TV, the way we see movies, everything is urgent, immediate. We expect to see that immediately when we want it, and we want it now. And I see that being a very difficult dance to play when you have things like, as you mentioned, really embracing or changing or working within the limitations of a brand. You have those expectations that you mentioned around your faith-based organization and the connections to the church and what that means, what some of the opinions are. I'm just going to say in our current climate right now, what those opinions are and how that impacts you. I see that as being a very kind of difficult dance to play between kind of all of those worlds and how you find a way to balance that. I don't have a question. It was just a statement. And my last question really, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that I didn't specifically ask you about?
What you were just talking about, that what occurred to me there, I think it was John Maxwell back in the day used this as an example from scripture. And many people know it. Be not conformed, but be transformed. Right. By a renewal of your mind. And he used this in terms of planning and business planning to say, being conformed is being subjected to these external pressures. Mm-hmm. That you're allowing your outside environment to mold you into what you are. Transformation is internal. It's you becoming what you want to be, even against that external force. And I think that's a very nice illustration of really, I think, what a lot of people, both that work at a university, that support a university, that are part of our constituencies, is they want us to be transformed. We use the word transformative gifts in our vocabulary, and it means that we're going to not be subjected to these external pressures. We're going to take something that is going to be its own thing. Right. And back to the what would I snap my fingers? That's where can we rally around this general principle that we're going to transform and create a university that has meaning and purpose that's different than what all of this thinks we should be. Who is that core group of people that is willing to say, I want TOU to be like this? Right. And I'm willing to invest and I'm willing to make a difference to make that happen. So again, maybe that's a common theme of everything we talked about today, but I think that's really and that's a very hard thing to do. That's not easy for any of us to figure out. Yeah, the way forward, I think, in all of the conversations I've had is difficult to see and difficult for everyone to figure out. I think institutions are definitely juggling with the same set of challenges, but everybody is in a different place in terms of how it impacts their brand, how it impacts their bottom line, how many, certainly regionally, and what that means for them as an institution and their ability to their longevity in general. So I think the transformation piece is well taken, and it probably is something that everyone is trying to figure out what that means for them in our current climate and the current set of circumstances everyone seems to find themselves in. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your time and your experience and perspective with us today. It's been a thoughtful and generous conversation, of course. To our listeners, our watchers, I hope this episode sparked ideas, affirmed your own experiences, or maybe helped you see a challenge in a new light. If you're a leader in higher ed, communications, marketing, advancement, alumni relations, whatever it is, a president, finance, and you want to contribute to this evolving conversation, we want to hear from you. The truth is, this is more than just talk. Ideally, it's the start of a shared roadmap for the future of our field. So let's get to work. Thanks so much again, Chris. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.